Welcome to Hey Listen, where we discuss faith, leadership, and the mission of the church. We're so glad you've joined us. Now to today's episode. All right, we're continuing our conversation today. I never thought we would have a podcast on pond scum, but here we are.
Here we are.
So on our way into work this morning, my husband, Chris, brought me in and I said we were discussing pond scum, and he immediately said, "Oh, the New York Mets." And I said, "Well, that was random." And he said, "No,
Not at
any
all.
good Cardinals fan would know that." So apparently I told him I would make sure I cited him. Back in the 80s, the New York Mets were pond scum.
That's right. Keith Hernandez and all those guys. So as soon as he said that, I was like, he is a true Cardinals fan.
Yes.
So I understand that completely. But no, we're actually going to talk about that green stuff that you see in your pond. If you have a little pond on a farm and you've ever been fishing,
Yes.
and you pulled up your fishing lure, even sometimes the fish, and covered in that green stuff.
What my kids would say, "Ooh, seaweed."
Right. Something like that. So that's cyanobacteria. And so here's what we're going to do. I will say right out of the gate, the science part of this is my weakness. I haven't studied these things in any detail for a long, long time, Kayla, like it feels like 100 years ago. But what I want to do is, from my notes, just explain a little bit of the more technical stuff. Now, it's not technical. We're showing a picture of pond scum up here. We know what that looks like. But it's so important for us to get this in our mind. And that's what it looks like in a pond. But now I want to show a picture of what it looks like under a microscope. And this is pond scum down on the molecular level, okay? And this is one of the most common organisms in all of nature. So that's what we're doing here. Pond scum is kind of a funny thing, whether you're a Cardinals fan or not, because it's a common thing. It's a simple thing.
Sure.
In fact, this is one of the most common elements. Cyanobacteria is like one of the most common things on planet Earth, all right? It's very simple, and scientists believe that it might have been one of the first organisms on Earth that could produce oxygen, and it has the ability down deep inside, and we're going to talk about this in a moment with the protein molecules. It has the ability to do photosynthesis. And if you remember back, that's one of the first concepts we learned, one of those amazing things in nature. Photosynthesis is a basic element as far as life goes here on Earth. But when we start looking at that process and what has to happen down deep inside of a cell, we're talking about advanced engineering. So if we were to now start talking about using the language of engineering, the engineering intelligence required to produce this is more complicated than any like car or spaceship or anything that we've actually engineered as human beings. So here we are, we're talking about pond scum. We're talking about a type of bacteria that's the most common thing on Earth. And yet when scientists look at it in a detailed way, Kayla, they're saying, wow, this is intricate. This is amazing. And whether a scientist is a believer or not, one of the things you'll find when you talk to people who can see these things and study these things, we're all amazed at the beauty and the precision of living things.
Yeah.
So I think we're all on the same level there. Obviously, the scientist then is going to fall back, if he's a materialist, as we've talked about in previous episodes, is going to fall back into a evolutionary process that got us to this point. Whereas Douglas Axe, the book Undeniable, this is, I brought my copy. I really want people to grab a hold of this because, some of his book is technical. He has these diagrams that just blow my mind. In fact, let me show you another picture here, Kayla. So this is a protein molecule, and on the left, as I'm looking at it, it's an unfolded protein molecule. But when all of the amino acids, which are those little bitty things in there, when they are in the proper sequence, and you can kind of see there's all these little dots, but that is a very intricate set of sequences. When all of those sequences are perfect, they collapse in, I think scientists call it, it folds in on itself and forms a structure like you see on the right.
Okay.
But you can't have the structure on the right unless all of the little dots there, all the little programming pieces are in perfect sequence.
That is mind-blowing. Okay.
So scientists are trying now to manipulate these things, and they can do it. It's not impossible because of our technology today, but what they're realizing is it's way easier to mess this up than to get it right. So a good example for some of our listeners who remember the early days of computers. In the early days of computers, people loved to get their little Commodore 64 and they would type in all these characters, just thousands and thousands of characters to create a tiny program. And that program would usually be like a ball bouncing on the screen. And it took hours, if not days, to do that. Okay, so what we're talking about here with protein molecules and what we're seeing in that picture is just these incredibly long sequences that have to go together to make something work, so that so that the protein chain is in the proper sequence. And as I understand it, there's 20 amino acids. So it's not just 1, 2, or 3 or 4 things. It's 20 different amino acids. They're acids. In this picture, we only see like two colors. But if you can imagine 20 different colors, and then realizing all of those little dots have to be in perfect order for it to work. So again, anybody watching this or listening to this can say, "Oh, Jeremy, you got this wrong, or you got that." I know that's entirely possible. The point here isn't to be precise, and I'm not a scientist. But I really feel like if you go and read what Douglas Axe had to say, and by the way, this is a guy who has studied at Cambridge. He has been on the cutting edge of this particular kind of science, dealing with protein molecules, and so he's a true expert and authority in the field. So some of the book, is hard. But what I love, and what we're going to hopefully get to here in a little bit, is his illustrations and the way he can paint a larger picture of what's happening here. I think a Christian ought to be looking at this, because it will, I think it will give you great confidence, Kayla, as just a Christian, saying, okay, can I be a thinking person and a person of faith? And I think Acts proves we can be.
Sure.
And it also I think it puts the ball in the court of the materialist. Again, not all scientists are materialists, but the scientists who are, the ball is back in their court, because the more we see here about the complexity and the intricacy of creation. Again, let's just go back to this. We're talking about one of the most common organisms, cyanobacteria, and it is so complicated that it boggles our minds. Yeah. So now that doesn't even, it gets so much more complicated when we're talking about a human being.
Right, yeah.
And different things that, that comprise us as human beings, like our brains and the complexity of the human mind. So pretty exciting stuff, really.
Well, and when I think about this from like a parenting or a kids ministry, perspective, our kids go to public school, and so they're learning science through the lens of what the public school is teaching. Right. And we try to keep an eye on that and have good open discussion with our kids. But from a homeschool or a private school, or even just what we are teaching our kids at home, this should be exciting to us.
Yes.
That if you're able to teach these things through this lens of God as the designer, that's exciting. And I'm just thinking, some kids get fired up about science and they enjoy learning how things work and all that stuff. If you can look at all of this through that lens, that would, strengthen their faith, but maybe even help science be a little bit more exciting. Like, that's pretty cool.
I really believe it's important. And again, we've said so many times, whether public school, homeschool, Christian school, we want our kids to go and get degrees at universities in science. We want them to be even in the secular environment, they're going to have, if they're going to go to a big time university, most likely it's going to be a secular university. And these things are amazing to learn, but we also have to realize that the vast majority of the people in secular science are materialist. Their worldview is going to be different than ours. And so we can learn from them. There's this great principle in the Old Testament when the Egyptians, when the Israelites leave Egypt, they take all the gold and all of the treasures of the Egyptians with them out into the wilderness, and it's called the spoil of the Egyptians in the Hebrew Bible. And so I've always felt like that. As Christians, we do want to send our kids to get degrees at these universities that are great research facilities, that have the great research facilities. But we kind of have to have that spoil of the Egyptians mentality, that we're going to take the good stuff that academia can provide us. But I think we also need to realize that they could be wrong. Like the Darwinian materialistic worldview, I don't think is livable. I don't think it describes the world correctly. I think the biblical worldview does. But we're going to have to put ourselves in those environments. And I do worry sometimes that parents are so protective of their children that they don't want to put them in those environments because they're afraid that worldview might rub off. And it very well could. It's a dangerous thing.
It is. Yeah, it's a hard balance. It is. It's very scary.
But I love the fact that whether you're at public school and you're knowledgeable enough that when a good question is asked by your child, you can have not just a passing answer. Oh, well, maybe this, or just believe in God. No, you can actually say, well, there's another perspective here. And so I think that's what we're trying to do with this podcast. We're not trying to answer all the questions. We're not trying to be experts at cyanobacteria or anything like that.
I have been accused of that before.
Of course, many times. You are a resident pond scum expert here on staff. No, of course not. But we do believe that the more we find good books like Douglas Axe has written, the better we can be as educators in our own home. And we can send our kids off to difficult places knowing that they have a firm foundation that's built on faith, yes, but also some incredible facts.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked a little bit about Darwin and looking ahead at your notes. So with what Axe is calling, the universal design and all of this, where does that find some things that are possibly missing or lacking there in Darwin's perspective?
So Darwin was looking at the world without being able to see down deep microscopically like we can today. And of course, he's working long before there was any understanding of DNA and the double helix and protein molecules and amino acids and all these basic things now that when we study science, those, again, if your kid takes a Science 101 class, even in high school, he's going to be talking about things that are far beyond where Darwin was. So we need to, not all of Darwin's thoughts or ideas are bad. In fact, he was brilliant. He was able to make some keen observations, but so much of his observations couldn't go deeper, like just even the most basic science can show us today. So that's part of it. Axe has what he calls the universal design intuition. And what he's saying there is that, and we'll give some illustrations of this in a moment, he's saying that the further down we go into a cell, when we start looking at these basic elements of proteins, amino acids, and their sequences, we begin to realize that they're not just there, they're programmed. So let's go back to our illustration of how much code has to go into to just make a simple ball go across the screen. Well, to make it so that that photosynthesis can occur in a cell, it is a crazy number of sequences that have to be in a row. The programming is insanely complicated. And to put it most simply, Axe is just saying if there is a complex code, then there had to be a coder. Right?
Right.
You know, if you look at a screen and it has an action on it, you intuitively know that there's programming behind that. So why would we think, and what Douglas Axe is saying is, why would we think any differently when we're able to go down into the depths of the cell, when we can look in a protein molecule, when we can see these sequences that seem to be so perfectly in line, it looks like a code. So he's just saying, there has to be a coder.
Right. Obviously, someone created that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he says this, he says, tasks that we need knowledge to accomplish can be accomplished only by someone who has that knowledge. So that basically is, there is a coder behind the code. And so he says the biggest problem with Darwin's theory is, and this is a quote of his, is the improbability of characters becoming arranged into long functional sequences by accident. So gene sequences and protein sequences alike are incredibly intricate and complicated. Like I said a moment ago, when we were looking at that cell as it folds in on itself, that can only happen if the programming is right. Otherwise, it doesn't fold down, and thus it is not functional.
Right.
And we know that in nature, sometimes there will be a mutation.
Sure.
Right? So when those mutations occur, those folds don't happen appropriately, and therefore usually the cell will die, but it can cause mutations and cancers, if you will, so to speak. And so that's kind of what's going on. So one way that Axe, and again, this will kind of start some of the illustrative. I think this is the most helpful part, because most of us can't think down deep in the cell, so we need some analogies, right? So he says, if we compare a cell to a modern car, a protein sequence is like the individual parts of the cell, analogous to the individual parts that make up a car. So if you think of it that way, obviously you have to have an engine attached to a transmission, attached to a frame, which is attached to wheels. And then there has to be a steering wheel, and there has to be brakes, and there has to be an accelerator, a gas pedal. And all of these things are very specifically connected for a function, which is to drive down the road. So if you think in those terms, every cell is made up of all these parts that have to be plugged in together and connected together. Now, this is all happening in microscopic ways.
Right.
So just keep in mind, think about like if you've ever put together a model car. I see today where you can buy model engines that are to scale and small that actually run.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can actually build these things. And I see like the blown out version of it, and there's like a million parts, and every one of those have to go in the perfect place, and they have to be put in a very precise position. A piston does, and there can't be like air getting in the wrong places, right?
Yeah.
So I was reading somewhere where, like down in pond scum, you're talking about like the engineering is so precise that like not even a tiny bit of a cell can escape it, and the pressurization on each side of the membrane is perfect. All these things that just are way beyond my understanding in engineering, but all the way down in the most simple organism, that green stuff in your pond. Is delicately put together in such a way that it lives, has functionality, actually serves, this larger process. Those bacteria have a larger process that they serve in nature. It's all connected. So that's one of the analogies he uses, is this code being just perfect so that it can function.
Yeah. I just keep thinking, how can you not believe?
Right.
It's
easier to believe.
It is. I can't imagine hearing all of this and so much more and feeling like, I think this all happened by accident. And I know in a lot of ways that's a narrow-minded view, because I have grown up with this viewpoint. I have been, brought up in this and haven't really ever thought any different, but Perfect. So you and I were raised, blessed to be raised in homes where faith was a big deal. But it didn't take long for us to go to school and realize not everybody had that gift. Right. True. And that jarred me. I can remember as a little kid hearing people that, you talking to a friend over lunch and they never go to church. My goodness, that just blew my mind. Yes. How is that even possible? And then as you get a little older, it's not just that they don't go to church, but they believe the world is just, they look at the world completely different. Right. Yes.
Okay, we don't have to go to Africa to get a different worldview. Here's a different worldview at a elementary school in rural Illinois.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Okay. And so all of a sudden, wow, I've never even thought about other ways to think about things. And so, when we get out into the world, we start to realize that there's other ideas. So I think it's good for a parent to prepare the kid for that ahead of time. They need to know that these other ideas are out there so that the shock doesn't happen. I think that sometimes our kids will go off to university even and they hear these very well-reasoned arguments and they're easily swayed by those because at home we haven't taught them that there's intricate arguments that are contradictory to that particular worldview. Let's go ahead and not right away. I mean, not our kindergartners. We don't need to be talking worldview with our kindergartners, but don't we need to start preparing them for this marketplace of ideas?
Right.
And not all ideas are good.
Right. And how to have kind conversations about that. I remember when my son he was probably first or second grade, and they were taught something sciencey. I can't remember exactly what the situation was, but he said, but she was wrong. And I said, you're right. And we believe that. But he was like struggling with even learning. It was something evolution or something, millions of years, all of that. And I said, you can just think of it as you're learning how other people think. And we need to do that. We need to have some perspective on the beliefs of other people, those specifically around us and stuff. But he was really struggling with that as a little kid. Now, I've talked about him before. He's a deep thinker. He feels really big on those things. But they need to be aware that other people think differently and how to have kind conversations, from the beginning.
Absolutely. And, again, Darwin's theory is still, it's the common way of thinking through the world and creation today. And we just need to be honest with people and say, it's not that we say Darwin didn't have any good ideas, but what if there are better ideas? I mean, in what field of study would we take a 100 plus or 150-year-old idea and just automatically assume that there's nothing better? So let's talk about another issue that Axe brings up about Darwin's theory. He argues that when it comes right down to it, he doesn't see any evolving at the cellular level, at what he's looking at in protein molecules, et cetera. It looks like that we've reached an evolutionary endpoint, and that shouldn't be happening. We should be seeing, as much as we're able to investigate today, we should be seeing evolutionary change a little bit more clearly.
That was something that really stuck out to me as I probably hadn't thought of that, but as I was reading over your notes over the last couple of weeks, I thought, oh, that is true. I mean, this isn't something I've put a ton of thought to. And so that stuck out to me of that kind of
I think the counter argument to that, Kayla, is that what the scientist is going to say is, of course, you're not going to see it. You need millions of years. Now, whether you're a new Earth or old Earth person, that can shake you up a little bit. It doesn't shake me up. I think we need to be humble about how old the universe is. I don't know that the Bible gives us a perfectly clear picture of that, and that's kind of irrelevant to me. But I do believe that Axe and others are saying, no, wait a second. Evolution is something that is a work that. We can see things changing a little bit, but here's what he says. He says, nothing evolves unless it already exists. And Darwin still hasn't helped us come to terms with how things had their origins. And that's what we talked about last time a little bit, is that origin of the species. That's not what Darwin did. He did show that within a species, there can be slight changes, but that's a big difference between something going from, say, pond scum to a fox.
Sure.
Or even pond scum to a fish, if we want to kind of keep things in the water. That he's saying, Axe is saying, no, Darwin's theories don't show how that came to be. We can certainly see natural selection. We can see changes, but that's a little different than what we would say is true evolutionary change.
Yeah.
Okay. So as I knew we would, we're kind of, today I wanted us to really just hit kind of a little bit more of the science and the technicalities. What I want to do next is build on this in our next episode. So just to give people a little bit of a, hold on to next week kind of thing. What we're going to do next is I want to talk a little bit about probabilities. Okay. So I know right now, if you watch football, you're constantly being bombarded by ads to gamble on, to bet on sports, right? In Missouri, I think we've just legalized it.
That just became legal.
Right. So maybe another episode to talk about. But anyway, so gambling is all about stats, okay? Sure. And everybody who goes to Vegas thinks they're going to beat the odds, and then they go home a lot poorer because the house always wins, right? So when we're talking about statistics, we're talking mathematics. And, when we talk faith and science, one of the things that our science friends want to tell us is they're just looking at objective, hard reality. So I say, okay, let's do that. Let's talk about objective, hard reality. And one of the things that it really isn't open to subjective interpretation is math. Okay.
Sure.
Statistics. If you say I have a 1 in 10 chance, okay, we're saying that 1 out of 10 times in terms of probability, this is going to happen or not happen, right? And then, and in other ways, we can see that mathematics is the hardest of hard sciences. It gives us the sharpest edge in terms of objective reality. So if we're going to talk about creation and we're going to talk about faith versus maybe a materialistic viewpoint, let's bring some math into this. And so I want to talk just briefly next time about the probabilities. And then in a more, I think, because most of us are not math people,
No.
At the Muniz household, we're literature people. We're not math people. So we're not math or science people. And here we are, you and I talking about math and science. But the majority of our time next time, I want to give some simple explanations because we need to try to, again, take this very complicated idea of creation and science and protein molecules and say, okay, when we're talking about complexity, what does that mean? What does that look like? And so I think Acts, again, read the book. Almost all of what we're going to talk about, I have like 2 or 3 more illustrations to give, comes straight from him. And they begin to show us, oh my goodness, wow. Statistically, it's impossible that this happened by chance. And then also when we look at it in terms of the sequences and steps necessary for just the most basic functions to occur, we realize somebody has to plan that. There has to be knowledge and wisdom behind the action. So I think that's where we'll go next time, and it'll be a little bit more simple next time.
Yes, I think you have some really great illustrations and some of that's going to kind of put a little ribbon at the end of this.
I hope so.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you again for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Hey Listen.